Well, hello and good morning. Just like to start a new channel. I'm going to call it Arthurism. I think that's the direction to go in. Arthurism. So, yes, I think the first thing I want to start out with, I'm using Arthurism as based on one of my unusual conversations while serving on the Board of Trustees of the Texas State Museum of Asian Cultures. I do wonder if that was actually official. I need to look at the online board documents someday to look that up, but that's what I believed I was. I wasn't board secretary at the time, and I was certainly not looking up online documents. I was only board secretary many years ago, but in honor of the channel Andrewism, referencing that, I think it might be interesting to have a non-anarchist, a more conservative or Marxist-Leninist perspective on social matters and social issues. Slightly different format as well. And it's not like Andrewism, where Andrew is a small character, represents himself as a small character, as you'll see. It's going to be a guy who has a master's degree in East Asian Studies from the Ohio State University. And has some conservative leanings and some Marxist-Leninist influences. So, first topic of discussion is the concept of hierarchies and justified hierarchies. Are there justified hierarchies? I think the answer is obviously yes. I come at that from I've spent a lot of time in my life in South Texas. In my social circles, no one was openly stating that they were an anarchist. I don't really know how many people may have believed that, but in my social circles and what I believed, and what I believe people around me believed, we definitely had justified hierarchies. And I tend to think that is true. Now, how many are there? Some of these do overlap with the concept of the 5 human relationships, although not all of them. Friendship is not hierarchical in the 5 human relationships, although even the husband-wife relationship is, it's hierarchical, but not like other relationships. So that's definitely a matter, but certainly the most obvious justified hierarchy, as people call it, is the concept of the parent-child relationship. I think that's pretty straightforward. It makes sense to me. If you are genuinely someone's parent, I'd say you have actual authority and control over them that I think that can be presumed benevolent. I think that's reasonable. I think that's completely reasonable. Maybe a little bit more, I'm a little bit more worried in certain historical circumstances regarding step-parents, but contemporary society, even a step-parent, I think, can pretty easily qualify as being part of a justified hierarchy. The authoritative partner in that. I think it's clearly normal in that kind of relationship for the parent to care for the child, and for other institutions, including the state, to step aside and say, we aren't going to interfere. We think it basically remains benevolent most of the time. I think that's reasonable. That's an obvious example of a justified hierarchy, parent-child. What's the second justified hierarchy? Ruler-subject. I think that is actually true as well. Some people have a more anarchist view on that, but I actually, again, don't share that viewpoint. You're not going to get sensible government, or sensible law, sensible justice, without some kind of ruler-subject hierarchy. Obviously, reasonable ruler needs to be somewhat reasonable. Can't be legalism, as it was called. The old ancient ideology of legalism obviously it was a little bit over the top. Most other government relationships, though, besides certain totalitarian governments, have basically been, as a general concept, a justified hierarchy. Most kings and empires were reasonable by the standards of their time, and Today, of course, there's that complexity of what even is the government? Is the government genuine? Is the government honest? That was where the whole question of a justified hierarchy becomes a little bit more complex. There's always been that issue of state legitimacy, of legitimate succession, legitimate transition of governments. There are serious questions today about the modern state, but in principle, ruler subject or state subject is a justified hierarchy in principle. So we've checked off two, which I thought two clearly justified hierarchies. What else is another one that we're going to talk about? Is a justified hierarchy? I'm not sure off the top of my head I can think about other justified hierarchies. Those are the ones that are obvious. And where you get dicey, of course, is something like husband-wife. That gets really complex and dicey. I'd say it probably kind of depends on the relationship. Some are less hierarchical, some are more. Just kind of depends on who the couple is and the social context, maybe what's practical. Certain ancient and traditional marriage relationships involve large age gaps. It's probably an inherent hierarchy there. Just one person has more life experience than the other. There's less of an age gap. Well, that doesn't change the situation. It goes much less hierarchical. So it might be a relationship where it's justified, but it's frequently non-hierarchical. And certain circumstances cannot be hierarchical. Like, there's situations where husband and wife just can't be hierarchical. Usually that's, at the top of my head, that would only come across in extreme historical situations. Like if there's some disagreement on selling a child, obvious situation. Obviously, that's a situation where you have to do some kind of, they can't just let the husband overrule the wife on a situation like that. So there's a limits. It's more complex than just being a hierarchical relationship. Husband-wife, that gets complicated. But I think in general, we've only really come across two clear justified hierarchies, ruler-subject and parent-child. But I think those concepts do make sense as far as justified hierarchies go. Now let's go to the clearly unjustified hierarchies. Here I would enumerate master-slave, capitalist-worker, and landlord-tenant. Those three I would consider, in principle, unjustified hierarchies. Sometimes they're just what people have to do in a short-term economic or social situation, but they're not justified hierarchies in and of themselves. They're often, in many cases, those situations of long-term or permanent social disasters of some sort. So those are three. I'd say, anything that is slavery, landlordism, capitalism, there's an unjustified hierarchy going on there, in my opinion. Blocks certain developments, certain parts of Mencius were basically just blocked off and became impractical for large sections of the population in the world, and China, of course, particularly because of landlordism. Obviously, that's an extreme case, of course, but in general, those are the hierarchies you want to avoid. Any of those open people up to some serious exploitation and harm. So, we've got some justified hierarchies and got some unjustified hierarchies. And honestly, unjustified hierarchies can deform the whole system. They're very serious. Once you have anything along those lines, oh boys, it gets very deformed. Anyways, here's the introduction, a very boring introduction, but I think an important one too. I'd say what it fundamentally comes down to: two justified hierarchies, ruler, subject, and parent-child, and of course, the unjustified hierarchies in slavery, capitalism, and landlordism. Adam Smith himself criticized landholding as a source of wealth. He had this whole wealth of nations concept. I haven't regarded the details on that, but that's widespread. There's a widespread understanding of those issues. There's also, of course, an understanding of, obviously, the issues Americans faced with regards to slavery, and of course, capitalism. People experience it a lot nowadays. Very complex hierarchy in many respects, but definitely there's a bit of a hierarchy going on there. It isn't just complete equal relationships unless you yourself are a factory owner with a nice tool and die assembly line. Well, we should bask in the knowledge and the happiness and the assurance that parent, child, and ruler subject are good in general. Thanks. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this first episode. I'll definitely try to keep the next episode much more exciting. See you.